afternoon to wherever you are joining us from. My name is Angela Labrosi. I'm the Channel Partner Director at Within3. As I'm looking over the list of names, I'm definitely recognizing many of you whom I've spoken with, or if you've participated in our VEP program. So I really appreciate you making the time and joining us today for our first ever partner talks. Just wanted to, take a little level set as to what we really hope to achieve with today's conversation, as well as additional partner talks moving forward. We're really hoping to host this as a monthly discussion amongst industry partners from around the world, that this can not only be a great networking opportunity for you to meet other like-minded individuals that work in the life science community, and specifically hail from medical communications, commercial, or even clinical agencies. For today's talk, as you may have seen from the invitations, we are going to be speaking about webcasts and webinars. This has certainly become a very popular topic and something that I'm sure all of you are having conversations with your clients. So that's why we wanted to kick off with that topic today. So our agenda is going to involve roughly about 20 minutes or so from our guest speakers, who I'll introduce in a minute. And then I would love to open it up for, discussion, Q&A. We would really love to hear from you in terms of your experiences, what's worked, what hasn't, and any questions. We really want you to walk away from today's discussion with some real actionable steps and what you can use as you're planning for your clients. And then also would love to find out, what topics interest you for future discussion. So we'll definitely be taking time at the end. But I'd love for you to think about that as we're in our discussion today. What other topics are of interest? You're also welcome to throw those in the chat, as well as any questions, as Mandy said. So before I turn it over to Mandy and Denise, would love to just take a second to put a poll up, and would love to just find out, where everybody's background is in terms of live events. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. So if you all wouldn't mind just taking a second just to answer the question. Let us know, what's really been your involvement in terms of live event strategy. And this will just also help us, as we're directing the conversation, get a feel for everyone's experiences. Great. See, some of you have done a few of them. Some that haven't. Okay, this is great. So we've got a nice wide spectrum of experiences with live events. That's great. I'll give you just one more second if anybody else wants to answer. Great. So we'll just share those results. So looks like we've kind of got a little bit of everyone on the line today, which I think is great. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to my colleagues and our guest speakers for today, Denise Bennett and Mandy Brown, who work at Within3 and our web conference studios. So I will turn it over to both of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angela. Denise here. I head up our web conference studios team, and I supervise a team of producers from around the globe so we can accommodate all time zones. So we're ready for showtime whenever your events might be. And aside from our technical skill sets with web conferencing, we also share a skill set that includes making strategic consultations for live virtual. We will always advise you on what makes the most sense based on your goals and what feels right for the overall experience of your participants. And we have experienced coaching moderators, and I'll speak to that later on in our presentation. We're also creative problem solvers, so we can take in everything you're hearing from clients and we present back solutions. Overall, what I hope you take from today's presentation is how you can look to a team like ours as a collaborator. Everyone here is invested in the success of our mutual clients. So along the way, we're going to give you some practical tips so that we can build on a shared vocabulary of how to talk about live virtual. So with that, I will pass it over to Mandy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mandy Brown. I'm a senior producer here at Within3. I'm on the US team. I'm in Southern California. And we're so happy to have you all here for the live virtual engagement topic. One question that we get often, and Angela gets from our partners, we get it in our web conference studios team quite often, is what's the difference between a webinar, a web meeting, a webcast? There's a lot of terms floating around out there. And it's unclear really for a lot of people what the difference is. So first of all, when you're talking with your clients and your partners about this topic, it's important to really understand what they mean by it too, because a lot of people don't understand the difference, and just getting to the bottom of what they really want to do for the meeting that's in question is important. But really, the true technical definition of a webinar is going to be something that is more of a linear presentation. You're hosting usually up to about 100 or hundreds of participants. You can have many, many people on a webinar, sometimes 1,000 or more. Registrations usually required. It's more of a broadcast, so more of a production or show. And it's, like I said, linear, oftentimes didactic or an educational type program. There's usually a very formal type of presentation. Sometimes the audience won't even have their cameras on. So it's, like I said, it's that one-way stream. And you might have a little bit of interaction and engagement using chat or question and answer, but the interaction is very limited. On the other hand, though, a web meeting is something that's more of usually a small group setting. So attendees are able to share their voice, they're able to see each other, similar to what we're doing today. There's a conversation happening back and forth, and there's more use of engagement features. So you're able to use a poll, you can do smaller groups, even so with the breakout rooms, and then the participants are able to see each other, to engage, and have more of a connection. It's more to simulate that in-person experience when you're in a room or a restaurant together and you're able to have that conversation across the table. So that's kind of the difference there. There's also a term webcast floating around, and it's a very general term. So just casting information across the web is what a webcast is. It doesn't have much of a definition between the two. But again, just understanding when you're having those conversations with your clients, what it is that they need, so that you can best support them with the type of format that they want to plan that meeting in. So I'm going to turn it back over to Denise, who's going to talk more about finding your live virtual venues.
Thanks, Mandy. So as you already know from completing the VEP program here at Within3, we have a hybrid approach to virtual engagements, given that we're home to our own asynchronous platform. So I'm noting that relationship between live and async with that arrow in the middle. So when we're thinking about an overall event strategy, we're thinking about how we can strike the right balance. And it often comes down to a few key areas I'm going to highlight so that you can also be effective consultants when considering if the hybrid approach is right for you. And after completing the VEP program, I'm sure you're familiar with the ideas on that right column. So I'm going to focus on the ones on the left, noting that these are mutually reinforcing and we believe that they're best used together. So when it comes to time constraints, think about exactly what you need to accomplish with participants in the room. In a live event like this one today, we only have the time we have. We don't have an asynchronous session to continue the conversation if more things come to mind, though you all did come prepared after doing your VEP modules. In an ad board format, there's no way we could get through everything in an hour or two. And anything above the 3-hour mark is really challenging when it comes to both scheduling and attentiveness. But again, bringing it back to strategy, I wanted to share an example. I was recently on a call where a client said one of her key goals was building relationships, not just beyond doing an ad board. So given that as part of this ad board, there was a lot of detailed data to review in terms of what she was considering on the asynchronous side of things. It would be really unproductive to present that for the first time in a live setting without having time to review it. And so we talked at length about how an introductory live meeting would be a great way to make introductions by way of building relationships so that everyone could spend time with one another and get acquainted before engaging with each other's avatars online. So next, when it comes to participation, in a virtual setting, participation can look a lot different than you might be accustomed to. Sometimes people are more introverted in a live environment, and as consultants, you want to coach your moderators to set up their screen in a way that they can comfortably see the slides and everyone's video tiles, and just that way that they can be attentive to observing, who's maybe went off mute and then back on. And they might have an observation that maybe they're a little shy to share to coax them out a bit. So there's still ways you can look for nonverbal cues in a live meeting in a virtual setting. but it does take a little bit more time and finesse to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. So when thinking about participation, this is also where I would pause to consider how many people are invited to participate and how much time you have allotted, because that may be too many people with too little time to make that as effective as it could be. And lastly, with focus and readiness, you all showed up today with no other expectations of what Angela put forward in the program description, but we did lay the foundation with your VEP modules. Some people couldn't make it today. Maybe you're already thinking about your next meeting. We only have 1 hour today, and I will tell you, we only have 4 to 5 content slides. So by way of an example, using this talk, we are using this as a way to give a broad overview based on what would be best for your work and working with clients. So in terms of speaking of preparation, let's talk about pre-production. The role of a producer is critical. People like us are here to support with logistics so that you can focus on content. Pre-production keeps everyone in mind, both presenters and participants. Everyone is going to feel the most confident when they feel prepared and know what to expect, especially in a live setting. So this includes clear and thoughtful instructions and visual production summaries. So I noticed a few of you had said that you'd worked on event series before, so maybe you'll relate to this. No one likes getting hit with a wall of text in an email, especially if they're overwhelmed and nervous because something like a live engagement is new to them. So using tables and calendars whenever possible, especially if it's to emphasize interdependent deliverables. You can't have an effective dress rehearsal without a mostly complete slide deck and enough buffer time after the rehearsal to make adjustments. And you can't push back a dress rehearsal if you needed to coordinate multiple schedules. So an effective rehearsal and technical orientation will include an overview of the flow of the event. When we were rehearsing for today, I can't tell you how many builds I removed from this deck because it just did not flow as we were talking through it. Always make sure everyone logs in early on the day of the event. And I would set that expectation up front in terms of the time commitment, because an ample time for a final tech check on the day is critical. And an effective dress rehearsal will also assign roles. It's not just who's presenting. So there's a few key questions that come to mind. Who greets everyone when they come in the room? Who keeps an eye on the chat? Who's managing the time? What's the best way to communicate the time to the moderator? Do they feel comfortable if you politely interrupt, or do they prefer the chat? Same way goes for how you want to manage the Q&A. Who's responsible for email or calling a participant who might be missing at the start of an event? And lastly, support. As with the dress rehearsal example, you want to build in contingency time into your calendar. Know what your real deadlines are and which ones are maybe moved up a little bit to be scarier than they need to, because you're building in that contingency time to make sure that everything gets done. Same goes for the event. If the conversation's really flowing, you want to have some flexibility, and especially but contractually, sometimes you just can't go over time. There's a hard stop. And so I would say if you make that agenda for 90 minutes, plan the content for 80 to give you that flexibility. So during the event, and when it comes to contingency, you want to make sure there's a dedicated point of contact, both in the meeting in advance, if anyone needs support. As Mandy pointed out with our housekeeping at the beginning, she's your contact for in-meeting here. For running slides, who's the backup? Anyone can have a technical hiccup. So who else has a final copy of the slides and will be prepared to pull them up if needed to? What happens if you lose your internet connection? This just happened recently on the East Coast with all of Verizon. Every single person with Verizon internet had a service interruption. By the way, if you don't already have an Ethernet connection for your laptop, for those of you running events, please do not run these live meetings off of your Wi-Fi. If you leave with anything today, just promise me. That is important to me. So thanks. And then how do you communicate during the event? Is it through private chat in the interface, or do you need to be in touch with the planning team via text? Thinking about all of these is all part of the strategy, with consideration for overall experience and making a productive meeting. And that just doesn't end when the Zoom window closes on that event. So I'm going to turn it over to Mandy to discuss post-event considerations.
Thanks, Denise. And Denise and I were actually laughing quite a bit before the program today because we get really excited about pre and post considerations because it really is the meat of the meeting. And there's so much value to be had in the pre-production and your setup and the content that you provide in advance. And then obviously as well in the post-production, which I'm going to talk about here. There's the huge benefit of virtual meetings is that there is so much information available. There's metrics that you can share and organize and report those back and share a result strategy after your meetings. So there's one thing as well, other than the Ethernet tip that Denise gave, my tip would be not to forget about the end of your event. So having a strong conclusion to your live meeting and then thinking about the post-production considerations and the value that you can share and find in those metrics, reporting, the follow-up, the continued engagement, whether that's you're moving everyone back onto the asynchronous platform to continue the conversation and sort out any of those things that just weren't clear during the live meeting or vice versa. You're able to share back any feedback with your attendees. So you have KOLs that have really invested a lot of time and resources into your meeting, and it's important to be able to share and report back to them what you were able to do with their contributions. Again, just allowing that conversation to continue, and then you're able to take that data and information and prepare it and put it right in front of your stakeholders and say, were you able to accomplish your goals? So going back again to the pre-production, aligning those goals, having some STEM goals and SMART goals in place, and making sure that they're measurable so that perhaps you say, we want to have this percentage of conversation from our internal stakeholders versus this amount of percentage of conversation from our KOLs. So having some metrics in place that you can go back and you can say, were we able to accomplish these goals? So again, post-production considerations, this is a real value to having your virtual meeting. And don't forget to put those plans in place for having your follow-ups. And with that, that's the bulk of our presentation today. And we'd love to just open it up to you for questions. And you can feel free to revisit anything that we've talked about, webinars versus web meetings, pre-production, post-production, anything along the lines of a virtual live venue or asynchronous venue. We're here to help you with your questions and would love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you, Denise and Mandy. That was great. So as Mandy said, open it up to questions. And then also as you're thinking about any future topics, please feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions, or you're welcome to put them in the chat. I actually had a question I wanted to throw out to you both, while I'll give everybody maybe a chance to think, was in terms of the waiting room. I was curious, I get this question a lot from a compliance perspective in terms of managing who we are and are not letting into the room to make sure the appropriate people are there. I was wondering if you could speak to that and how you've been handling that.
Yeah, I'll be glad to take that one, Angela. The waiting room is a really important feature. And multiple platforms have that feature, whether they call it a waiting room or they call it a lobby. But it will help you to cross-check your attendance list in advance, which is really important, especially if you're working with contracts or honoraria, so that you can make sure that your meeting's safe and secure. There's lots of different things that you can do as well. You may have noticed that we were messaging you in advance of the program while you're waiting for the meeting to begin. So you can send a message out to your attendees, letting them know that they're in the right place or giving special instructions. And that gives you some time as well to make sure everybody is there that needs to be there.